This is reposted.
Shannon Huffman Polson is a veteran, serving as one of the Army's first female attack helicopter pilots. She is the founder of the Grit Institute and author of The Grit Factor: Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. You can find her at A Border Life on the Twitters. Okay, most of us, let's just start with one of your quotes, Shannon. Most of us aren't willing to face the places in ourselves that might be challenging, pieces of ourselves that we've worked to ignore for any number of reasons. We often have to push ourselves to delve deeper than daily life allows us in order to find the meaning hidden beneath the surface. All right, Shannon, that sounds great in theory, but my husband's got gout. I got to take care of him. I got 3 kids. I got soccer games all over the city. My boss just emailed me 3 revisions for the big project we got to get done. How in the world am I ever going to go deeper with myself when I got all this other stuff going on?
That is such a good question. And that is something that I think is a challenge for all of us, especially right now in the midst of times that are so uncertain and that are so challenging for all of us. Part of it is just taking some time. I mean, and I know that sounds easier said than done, and I have 2 kids at home as well, and we've just started homeschooling in the midst of all of this, so I totally get it. I completely get it. But I do think that there is some element of just saying, hey, I'm going to value myself and value the requirement of just taking a little bit of time to reconnect to what's really important. And maybe that's especially necessary in a time when things are so challenging for so many of us.
I think Larry and I are in completely different life situations. I don't have any kids, he does. And my mantra is keep going, even if you fail. So like, I saw an interview and you did this analogy of embracing failure. So like when you're landing a helicopter, you said you turn into the wind and the failure. Can you talk about more of that? I'm going to butcher it. Like, how does that work? Because
Well,
I think failure is great. I think you always come out the other side better, and people are scared to take the first step. And I think you're all about grit, and I love that. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, and whether you have kids or not, well, if you have kids, you fail every single day, and they let you know it, right? When you don't have kids, I think you can sometimes pretend like you had a pretty successful day. So, but yeah, all of us fail, and I think one of the things that really comes out, and in the I had a chance to interview dozens of women in the vanguard of their military fields, right? So early women general officers, a submariner, a combat rescue swimmer, one of the first women Army Rangers. So a lot of these other really phenomenal leaders that really had to undergo a double crucible, like both the challenges that the military threw at them, as well as the challenge of being in environments where they weren't welcome. And those were environments that just by virtue of entering them, they were taking a huge risk, right? They were taking a risk, they were risking failure, and certainly every single one of them and I failed many, many times, probably more times than we succeeded. And I think that's one of the real critical takeaways. And when I look at what's important about grit, I look at commit, learn, and launch. And part of this launch is the audacity to take the risks, to be willing to put yourself out there, go out on a limb, even in the face of failure. And when you fail, because we all will, know that that's part of success, that failure is not final, as Churchill said. And what I like to say is that it's not failure that matters, it's what you do with it that counts. And to your point on what that metaphor, what you do with it is that in the Apache, on takeoff and on landing, you turn the nose to face the wind, right? You can't get away from it. You can't go sideways. Anybody in a boat or an airplane knows that, right? You've got to go head on. And it's the only way to address it. It's the only way to walk through it. And I think it's a beautiful metaphor for life.
You know, one of the aspects of grit that you talk about during challenging times is that grit should be adaptable, and that comes by using creativity. Explain why creativity is so important.
Yeah, I love creativity. It's another direction that I really want to explore even more beyond this initial grit factor. But it is, I think sometimes a lot of us who are really type A and we've been successful, we've gotten things done, we know how to get it done, really run up against a wall sometimes when something doesn't work out or someone doesn't respond well, right? And that's where it became very, very clear that these leaders in the vanguard of their fields, the places that they succeeded were when they were adaptable. They had to be adaptable because, man, life changes, right? Circumstances change. All of us know that right now. The world changes significantly, and you've got to be able to adapt to that and not just stick to that one course that you were so committed to at the outset. So that adaptability is a critical skill for success. And it requires some creativity and some willingness to consider paths that you might not have previously considered.
So I'll let everyone else in the world decide, but I consider myself to have grit. I don't think it is, you're born with it. You maybe learn it. I'm curious, you grew up in Alaska, you went to school in North Carolina at Duke, you were all over the world with the military. Can you pinpoint like what grit, where you learned it or where it comes from?
I just had the most interesting conversation yesterday, and I will say growing up in Alaska was helpful. I mean, Alaska is,
I kind of thought that was going to be.
yeah. I mean, it's a place where you got to be prepared for anything, right? I remember having candles and warm clothes and big boots in the back time you drive in the winter, because if you go off the road and nobody picks you up, that's going to be how you live, quite frankly. There were bumper stickers up in Alaska that said, "Alaska, where men are men and women win the Iditarod." So the Iditarod is the sled race, been won by women more than once. And I think all of that gave this culture and this environment of like, yeah, you do what you need to do. You do what you need to do to survive. And women are not any different in what they are capable of doing than men are. I think the other part of that, of course, was growing up with parents that really made that a part of our lives. And I have all kinds of stories about my dad, but that was a very big part of how I was raised. And I think that was probably pretty critical to how I was able to manifest that later on.
Sort of just double down on that idea. I mentioned early that you were one of the Army's first female attack pilots. So you're probably the only female in lots of settings when you started in the Army. Did you go in with a specific mindset that you had to be better than everyone because you had to prove you were different and better because you were a woman, or were you just doing a job?
I think it's sort of both, really. And when I was 23 years old when I arrived at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, after having gone through Fort Ruckers Flight School and the Apache transition course. So I was 23 years old. North Carolina, that's the 18th Airborne Corps, the tip of the spear, the Army's Contingency Corps, right? There's 120 male Apache helicopter pilots, combat pilots. And then I show up that's ever been there to fly the Apache. And the reality is I grew up being told I could do anything and there were no limitations. And it was, there was a huge loss of innocence in that process. I would say. And at the same time, I worked with some of the best people I will ever have a chance to work with. So I always want to caveat with that, some really exceptional people. And there were some exceptional people on both ends of the spectrum. So I think, and you realize quickly when you go into that situation, I didn't go into it with that. I went into it thinking, okay, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do as well as I possibly can. That's what I've always done. And you get there and you realize I'm going to have to do better, like better than the average lieutenant that walks in, because I'm being looked at and evaluated in ways that, 9 out of 10 of the other lieutenants who are all men are not necessarily being looked at. And so there was definitely a very elevated sense of the necessity of exceptional performance. And I will say every single leader that I interviewed for the Grit Factor had the exact same experience.
So I think you guys are using the Grit Factor as like showing a way forward for people, because you got there and you're like, I don't know what this looks like as for a woman, but now people can look at you and there's other, like, tech is historically male dominated. And so
Sure.
Can you talk about like what mentoring looks like, or being an example, like once you've made it through, how do you pay it forward to the future generations?
Well, that's really the genesis of the Grit Factor, right? Is I had a young lieutenant reach out to me almost 10 years ago, and she was just getting ready to start flight school. And she reached out and asked if I would be her mentor on an online mentorship platform. And I said, sure, of course, I'd love to do that. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I've been out of the military for over 10 years. I've gone through, my MBA at the Tuck School. I've worked in the corporate world. I've just been out of uniform for a while. And my experience as one of the first women to fly the Apache is certainly unique. So how can I scale the advice that I'm offering to her? And then if I do all that work, because I know it's going to be a ton of work, then how do I scale the people to whom that advice is available? And that is the genesis of the Grit Factor. I went out and started to interview these other women in the vanguard of their fields who were willing to share very candidly stories learned, and then really synthesize that into how do you take these, dozens of incredible stories, incredible lessons learned, synthesize that into the primary takeaways. And that is really my attempt to pay it forward, which is to say, what do I wish I'd had when I was starting out? What do I wish I'd had at many points, even in my corporate career, as you're making decisions, you're facing challenges, you're facing change. And so the Grit Factor is meant to do all of that. And I'm really, it's just an honor to bring it into the world. I know it will be very useful for so many people.
Shannon Huffman Polson, the book is The Grit Factor: Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the Most Male-Dominated Organization in the World. You can find her on the Twitters at A Border Life. Shannon, thank you so much for coming on. You are a pure joy to have on.
Oh, that's great. It does take grit to work in a closet. I'm with you.